Welcome back to Lena's Romantasy collection, where the slow burn is hot, the alphas are dangerously possessive, and the heroines always bite back. Quick question for the pack before we get started today. What is your favorite trope? Let me know in the comments and drop a fire emoji if you love an alpha who is completely wrapped around his mate's finger. Today, we have a special one. It's funny, it's packed with tension, and it features the exact kind of sassy, witty banter you guys love. Before we jump in, if you want to support the channel and get early access to stories like this one, make sure to hit that join button down below. It directly helps keep the lights on and the daily stories coming. Now, take a deep breath and grab your headphones. The mate bond is calling, and the alpha is in trouble. Let's read. Chapter 1. The border guard shoved Hazel Brooks forward. Her boots squeaked across the polished hardwood floor. She caught her balance before her knees hit the ground. Her battered green canvas messenger bag slapped against her hip. She adjusted the thick strap on her shoulder and glared at the men surrounding her. "Keep moving, Stray," the lead guard barked. Hazel rolled up the sleeves of her flannel shirt. She tossed her blunt, shoulder-length auburn hair out of her face. Her sharp hazel eyes narrowed at the guard. "You caught me sleeping under a pine tree. Was I snoring too loud for your delicate royal ears?" The guard grabbed her bicep. His grip dug into her skin. He marched her down the long corridor. "You trespass on King Leonard's land. You pay the price." "I did not see a sign," Hazel snapped. She jerked her arm away. "And even if I did, I don't care about your invisible lines in the dirt. I am a free wolf. I go where I want." The guard pushed through a set of tall double doors. The grand hall opened up before them. The space felt cold. High ceilings arched above them. Tall windows let in the afternoon light. A long table sat in the center of the room. At the head of the table sat Alpha King Leonard. He did not look up when they entered. He leaned back in a dark oak chair. He wore a sharp, tailored dark suit. Broad shoulders stretched the fabric. Dark hair swept back from his forehead. He tapped a thick platinum signet ring against the wooden table. The metal clicked in a steady rhythm. "My king," the lead guard said. He bowed his head. "We found this stray in the eastern woods. She was sleeping in the brush. She refuses to state her business." Leonard stopped tapping the ring. He raised his head. Piercing amber eyes locked onto Hazel. He did not speak. He just watched her. Hazel crossed her arms over her chest. She stared right back. She refused to look away. "Your lapdog needs a mint," she told the king, "and I want to leave." The guards in the room stiffened. A low growl slipped from the lead guard's throat. No one spoke to the Alpha King that way. Leonard stood up. He unbuttoned his suit jacket. He stepped down from the raised platform at the head of the room. His heavy boots made no sound on the floorboards. He walked toward Hazel. He stopped 2 feet away from her. He towered over her. Hazel tipped her chin up to keep eye contact. She did not take a step back. Leonard tilted his head. He breathed in. The scent of sun-dried linen and sweet orange hit his senses. The mate bond pulled at his chest. He recognized the connection the second he caught her scent. He kept his face blank. He looked down at the stubborn, defiant stray standing in his hall. "She is staying," Leonard said. His voice carried a deep, commanding rumble. The lead guard blinked in surprise. "My king? She is a stray. She has no pack allegiance. The holding cells are full. Where should we put her?" "I did not say throw her in a cell," Leonard answered. He did not take his amber eyes off Hazel. "She stays here, in the pack house." Hazel let out a loud, mocking laugh. The sound bounced off the stone walls. "Are you joking? I am not joining your little club. I don't follow pack rules. I don't bow to royalty." Leonard put his hands in his pockets. He watched her amusement. "I am leaving," Hazel declared. She turned around and faced the tall double doors. "You can keep your fancy house. I have places to be." "You are on my land," Leonard stated. Hazel looked over her shoulder. She offered him a sharp, wicked smile. "Then arrest me, king, or get out of my way, because I don't take orders from stray catchers." She started walking toward the exit. The guards stepped in front of the doors, blocking her path. Hazel stopped. She dropped her hand to the flap of her green canvas bag. Leonard watched her hand hover over the bag. He found her defiance fascinating. He gave a small nod to the guards. Do not let her leave. Chapter 2. The lead guard stepped into Hazel's personal space. He blocked the exit. He looked down at her with a sneer. You heard the king. You are not going anywhere. Hazel tightened her grip on the thick strap of her messenger bag. She glared at the man blocking her path. Move. You are a guest now, the guard mocked. He reached out a hand. Let me take your bag. We need to inventory your belongings. Hazel slapped his hand away. Do not touch my things. The guard growled. He lunged forward and grabbed the flap of the green canvas bag. He yanked it hard. I am warning you, Hazel said. She did not sound scared. She sounded annoyed. You do not want to put your hand in there. The guard ignored her. He shoved his thick fingers past the canvas flap. He rummaged around inside the dark space. We do not allow weapons in the pack house. I am checking for... A sharp screech echoed in the hall. Bandit lunged. The furry noodle of pure chaos shot out of the bag. Sharp teeth sank into the guard's index finger. The guard screamed. He ripped his hand back. Bandit held on tight. The ferret dangled in the air, jaws locked around the royal guard's flesh. Get it off! The guard yelled. He shook his arm frantically. Bandit swung back and forth like a pendulum. The ferret let out a triumphant hiss through his clenched teeth. The other guards drew their weapons. They stepped forward, confused and angry. Bandit, drop it! Hazel commanded. Bandit released his grip. He dropped to the floor with a soft thud. He scurried behind Hazel's boots and peeked out at the angry men. He licked his lips. The lead guard clutched his bleeding finger. His face turned bright red. I will snap that rat's neck. He took a heavy step toward Hazel. Hazel kicked her boot out, ready to fight. Enough, Leonard commanded. The word cracked through the room like a whip. The guards froze. They put their weapons away and stepped back. The lead guard cradled his hand, breathing hard, instead walked closer. He looked down at the small ferret hiding behind Hazel's boots. Bandit stared up at the king. The ferret did not run. He padded forward, sniffed the toe of Leonard's boot, and sneezed. A slow smirk spread across Leonard's face. He found the chaos brilliant. He looked from the ferret to Hazel. She stood her ground, ready to protect the small animal. He is a menace, Leonard observed. He hates authority, Hazel replied. She scooped Bandit off the floor. She placed the ferret on her shoulder. Bandit wrapped his long body around her neck and chattered at the king. The lead guard glared at them. My king, that beast drew royal blood. The penalty is... The penalty is nothing, Leonard interrupted. He did not look at the guard. He kept his attention on Hazel. You reached into a stray's bag without permission. You are lucky you only lost a few drops of blood. Hazel crossed her arms. She tapped her foot against the floorboards. She studied the king. He was not reacting the way alpha wolves usually reacted. He was too calm. It bothered her. I want a room with a window, Hazel demanded. And if anyone touches my bag again, the ferret gets to keep the finger. Leonard let out a low, rough chuckle. The sound surprised his guards. Give her the guest suite on the 3rd floor, the one facing the gardens. The lead guard bowed his head, holding his injured hand against his chest. Yes, my king. Leonard turned his back on them. He walked toward the head of the table. He stopped and looked over his shoulder. Dinner is at 8. Do not be late, Hazel. Hazel frowned. She had not told him her name. Chapter 3. The dining room felt like a tomb. Long, dark velvet curtains covered the windows. Crystal glasses gleamed under the chandelier light. 5 pack elders sat around the long table, dressed in formal attire. They spoke in hushed, serious tones about border disputes and trade agreements. Hazel sat near the middle of the table. She wore her flannel shirt and combat boots. She ignored the sneers from the elders. She ignored the fancy food on her porcelain plate. Leonard sat beside her. He cut his steak with slow, precise movements. He did not ask her to change her clothes. He did not force her to make conversation. He just let her sit there. Hazel let out a loud sigh. She slumped in her chair. She pulled a wooden pencil from her canvas bag. She chewed on the end of it. The wood splintered between her teeth. She stared at the ceiling. The pack politics bored her to tears. She needed a distraction. She needed to ruin this dinner. She opened her fingers. The wooden pencil rolled off the table. It hit the floor with a clatter. "Oops," Hazel muttered. She pushed her chair back. She slid out of her seat and dropped to her hands and knees. She crawled under the long table. The floor was cold. Legs of chairs and fancy shoes surrounded her. She spotted Leonard's heavy boots right next to her. The dark leather looked expensive. Thick black laces hung down the sides. A wicked idea hit her. She crawled closer. She grabbed the left lace. She grabbed the right lace. She pulled them across the gap between his boots. Her fingers moved fast. She tied a tight, complex knot, binding his boots together. She patted the leather. "Try leading a pack when you eat dirt on your way out," she thought, smiling to herself. Hazel grabbed her pencil. She crawled backward and slid back into her chair. She placed the pencil on the table. She picked up her fork and stabbed a piece of potato. She waited. 10 minutes passed. The elders finished their wine. They dabbed their mouths with cloth napkins. Leonard placed his silverware down. He wiped his hands. He pushed his chair back. The wood scraped against the floor. Hazel stopped chewing. She watched him. The elders stood up, preparing to bow to their king as he left the room. Leonard stood. Hazel waited for the trip. She waited for the stumble. She waited for the giant, intimidating Alpha King to crash into the table and ruin his perfect composure. Leonard did not fall. He did not even flinch. He stood perfectly still. He looked down at Hazel. He tilted his head. A dark, amused gleam filled his eyes. Before Hazel could react, Leonard reached under the table. His large hands clamped onto her waist. His grip was firm and unyielding. "Hey!" Hazel yelled. Leonard pulled her out of her chair. He lifted her effortlessly into the air. He held her suspended above the floor, face to face with him. Her combat boots dangled in empty space. The elders gasped in shock. A king holding a stray in the air was a massive breach of protocol. Hazel grabbed his wrists, trying to pry his hands off her waist. "Put me down! What are you doing?" Leonard held her steady. He leaned in close. His mouth brushed past her ear. "I don't need to walk," he whispered. He carried her out of the dining room. As he took his first stride, his sheer wolf strength snapped the thick leather laces right down the middle. He left the stunned elders staring at the empty chairs. Hazel kicked her legs, but his grip never loosened. Her prank had failed. Chapter 4. The midnight air bit at Hazel's cheeks. She crept along the gravel path. The pack house loomed behind her, dark and silent. She kept to the shadows, avoiding the garden lights. Bandit slept inside her canvas bag. He curled into a warm ball against her ribs. She patted the canvas once and kept moving. She reached the front gates. Tall iron bars stretched toward the night sky. A heavy electronic lock kept the gates shut. 2 royal guards stood by a small brick security booth. They held rifles strapped to their chests. Hazel walked out of the shadows. She marched right up to the iron bars. The guards turned. They grabbed their weapons, looking for a threat. When they saw Hazel, they relaxed their shoulders. "Open the gate," Hazel ordered. The guard on the left laughed. "Go back to bed, Stray. You cannot leave the estate without the king's permission." "I don't need a permission slip," Hazel argued. She grabbed the cold iron bars and rattled them. They did not budge. "I am leaving. You can open the gate or I will climb over it." "The top is lined with silver wire," the second guard warned. "Try to climb it and you will burn your hands off." Hazel glared at the wire glistening at the top of the fence. She kicked the iron gate with her boot. The metal clanged loudly in the quiet night. She hated feeling trapped. She hated the rules. "Are you going to shoot me if I walk out?" she challenged the guards. "No," a deep voice answered from the dark, "but they will not open the gate." Hazel spun around. She squinted into the gloom. Leonard leaned against the side of his sleek, midnight blue Aston Martin. He stood half in the shadows. He wore dark jeans and a plain black t-shirt. The formal suit was gone. He looked relaxed. He crossed his ankles and watched her. "Were you spying on me?" Hazel demanded. She dropped her hands from the iron bars. You are not very quiet, Leonard replied. He pushed off the car and took slow steps toward her. You kick gates, you argue with guards, you make a lot of noise for someone trying to sneak away. Hazel crossed her arms. Tell your watchdogs to let me out. No. Leonard stopped a few feet away. The night breeze ruffled his hair. I am not a prisoner, she snapped. I have not broken any pack laws. You cannot keep me here. I am keeping you here, Leonard corrected. He looked at her bag. Does the ferret need fresh air, or are you just restless? Hazel gritted her teeth. She hated his calm tone. She wanted him to yell. She wanted him to act like a tyrant so she could justify hating him. But he just stood there, unbothered by her attitude. Leonard turned and walked to the passenger side of the Aston Martin. He pulled the door open. He looked back at her over the roof of the car. Get in, he said. Hazel stared at him. Are you taking me to the border? No, Leonard answered. I am taking you for a drive. Since you refuse to sleep, we might as well see the territory. Hazel looked at the open gate, then at the open car door. She knew she could not fight the silver wire. She sighed, adjusted her bag, and walked toward the car. She slid into the leather seat. Leonard shut the door behind her. He walked to the driver's side and got in. He started the engine. The powerful motor roared to life, shattering the quiet night. He drove them away from the gate, heading deeper into his territory. Chapter 5. Morning sunlight streamed through the guest room window. Hazel sat on the edge of the mattress. She held a pair of sharp sewing scissors she found in the desk drawer. A pair of pristine, dark denim jeans rested on her lap. She found them in the massive walk-in closet. The tags were still attached. She gripped the scissors and drove the blades into the fabric. She cut a ragged hole over the left knee. She moved to the right knee and slashed a wide tear across the thigh. Frayed white threads hung from the denim. She tossed the scissors aside and pulled the ruined pants on. The cold air hit her bare skin through the slashes. She grabbed her green canvas bag from the floor. Bandit scrambled inside, burying himself under the spare clothes. Hazel slung the thick strap over her shoulder. She walked out of the room and headed downstairs. The pack held their morning meetings in the West Wing. Hazel followed the muffled sound of voices. She found a set of heavy oak doors. 2 guards stood outside. They glared at her torn jeans. She offered them a sharp, sarcastic smile and pushed the doors open without knocking. The heavy wood banged against the stone walls. The noise echoed through the room. 5 elders sat around a circular, polished table. Leonard sat at the head. He held a stack of territory ledgers. He did not flinch when the doors hit the wall. He just looked up, his face an unreadable mask. A female elder with sharp cheekbones slammed her hand on the table. What is the meaning of this interruption? Hazel walked into the room. Her boots thumped loud against the floorboards. She pulled out an empty chair right next to the angry elder. The wood shrieked against the stone floor. She dropped into the seat and slouched. I heard there was a meeting, Hazel said. She kicked her boots up and rested her heels right on the edge of the polished table. I wanted to see how the other half lives. The female elder stood up. Her chair tipped backward and clattered to the floor. Get your filthy boots off the table! Look at you! Torn clothes, disheveled. You look like a street vagrant. You insult this council with your presence. Hazel picked at a loose thread on her ripped jeans. I found these in the closet. Figured I would add some ventilation. Do you like them? I can tailor yours, too. The elder turned toward the head of the table. My king, this stray makes a mockery of our traditions. She disrespects the pack. She has to be thrown out of the pack house immediately. We cannot harbor a creature with zero regard for authority. Hazel hid a smirk. The plan worked flawlessly. She waited for Leonard to call the guards and toss her onto the street. Leonard closed the ledger. He placed it on the table. He leaned forward and rested his forearms on the polished wood. He looked at Hazel's boots resting near his papers. He looked at the ragged tears in her jeans. Sit down, Martha, Leonard ordered. His voice held a quiet, dangerous edge. Martha hesitated. She picked up her chair and sat down stiffly. The outfit is practical, Leonard stated. He looked at the council. She is a stray. She needs freedom of movement. She requires durable clothing for training and running. I find the alterations resourceful. Hazel dropped her feet off the table. Her boots hit the floor with a heavy thud. The smirk vanished from her face. She stared at him, baffled. "Resourceful?" Martha repeated, her voice tight with suppressed rage. "She cut holes in designer fabric." "It shows initiative," Leonard countered. He did not look at the elder. He kept his attention focused entirely on Hazel. "I prefer a mate who knows how to use a blade, even if it is just a pair of scissors. The meeting will continue. Hazel stays." Hazel gripped the edge of the table. Her chest tightened. He ruined it. He spun her insult into a compliment. Leonard picked up his ledger. He flipped to the next page. "Now, about the southern border dispute." Hazel sat frozen in her chair. The victory slipped right through her fingers. She glared at the side of his face, plotting her next move. Chapter 6. The pack house settled into total silence by midnight. Hazel sat cross-legged on the floor of her room. The single bedside lamp cast a low glow across the carpet. She chewed on the end of a wooden pencil, staring at the wall. A soft scrambling noise came from the shadows near the door. Bandit darted across the room. The ferret looked like a furry torpedo. He skidded to a halt in front of Hazel. He dropped a heavy, shiny object onto the carpet and let out a proud chirp. Hazel picked the object up. It felt heavy in her palm. The metal caught the lamplight. It was a thick, platinum signet ring engraved with the royal pack crest. "Bandit," Hazel whispered. "What did you do?" The ferret did a little hop and darted back into her canvas bag. Hazel stared at the ring. She recognized it instantly. She saw Leonard tapping this exact piece of jewelry against the council table. Bandit had managed to infiltrate the king's quarters and steal from him. A part of her wanted to throw the ring out the window, but stealing from an alpha king crossed a line. If the guards found it in her room, they could lock her in the dungeons for real. She needed him annoyed, not vengeful. She stood up and shoved the ring into her pocket. She slipped out of her room. The hallway stretched out in pitch darkness. The stone walls felt freezing cold. She crept along the corridor, pressing her back against the wall to avoid the creaky floorboards in the center. She counted the doors until she reached the heavy, carved entrance to the king's suite. She gripped the brass handle. She turned it with agonizing slowness. The latch clicked. She pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The room was pitch black. Heavy curtains blocked out the moonlight. The air smelled sharp. She kept her breathing shallow. She took a step forward, sliding her boot across the rug. She aimed for the spot where the nightstand should be. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the platinum ring. She stretched her arm out in the dark, feeling for the wooden surface of the table. Her fingertips brushed against polished mahogany. She set the ring down. The metal made a soft clink against the wood. A bright lamp clicked on. Hazel jumped back, her heart hammering against her ribs. Leonard sat in a leather armchair in the corner of the room. He wore sweatpants and a dark t-shirt. His arms rested on the armrests. He looked completely awake. He did not look surprised to see her standing in his bedroom in the middle of the night. "Do you usually do room service this late?" Leonard asked. Hazel swallowed the lump in her throat. She pointed at the nightstand. "I brought your ring back. My ferret took it. I did not steal it." Leonard glanced at the platinum ring resting on the wood. "I know." Hazel frowned. She crossed her arms. "What do you mean you know? Did you watch the rat take it?" "I heard him climb up the dresser," Leonard replied. He leaned back in the chair. "I let him take it." "Why?" she demanded. "Because I knew you would bring it back," he said. He stood up from the armchair. "You pretend to be ruthless, Hazel. You pretend you don't care about rules or consequences, but you returned it. You have a conscience." Hazel took a step backward toward the door. "Don't analyze me. I just didn't want your trigger-happy guards accusing me of theft." Leonard closed the distance between them. He stopped right in front of her. The height difference forced her to tilt her head up. He looked down at her, his expression serious. "You snuck into an alpha's private quarters while he was sleeping," Leonard pointed out. "That is far more dangerous than petty theft." "You weren't sleeping," Hazel shot back. "You were sitting in the dark like a creep." Leonard let out a rough, low laugh. He reached past her and picked up the ring. He slid it onto his finger. "Go to sleep, Hazel. Tomorrow, we go for a walk." She glared at his chest, turned on her heel, and marched out of the room. She hated that he always got the last word. Chapter 7. The dirt path cut through the dense pine forest. Thick tree roots broke through the soil, creating a jagged obstacle course. Hazel kicked a loose rock down the incline. It bounced off a tree trunk and disappeared into the brush. Leonard walked 3 paces ahead. He set a brutal pace. He moved through the difficult terrain without breaking a sweat. Hazel dragged her boots through the dirt. Her lungs burned. "This is stupid," she announced to the trees. "We have been walking for 2 hours. There is nothing out here but dirt and bugs." "We are checking the perimeter lines," Leonard answered without looking back. "It is my duty to inspect the borders." "It is your duty," Hazel argued. She pushed a low-hanging branch out of her way. "I am not part of this pack. I don't care if a rogue wolf crosses your invisible line. Let them have the dirt." Leonard kept walking. "You need to understand the territory." "I need a nap," Hazel corrected. She stopped walking. She planted her boots in the dirt and crossed her arms. The forest grew quiet around them. Leonard walked another 10 paces before he realized he no longer heard her dragging footsteps. He stopped and turned around. He looked back at her standing stubbornly on the path. "Keep moving," he commanded. "Make me," Hazel challenged. She expected him to yell. She wanted him to order her around so she could refuse. She wanted the fight. Leonard did not yell. He did not argue. He just started walking back toward her. His strides ate up the distance in seconds. Hazel held her ground. She lifted her chin, ready for a shouting match. Leonard did not stop when he reached her. He stepped right into her personal space. Before Hazel could open her mouth to speak, he bent down. He wrapped his right arm behind her knees and his left arm around her waist. He lifted her off the ground and threw her over his broad shoulder. "Hey!" Hazel shrieked. The world flipped upside down. The ground rushed past her vision. She stared at the back of his boots. Her canvas bag slapped against her ribs. She slammed her fists against his solid back. "Put me down!" she yelled. "Are you insane?" Leonard adjusted his grip, locking her legs against his chest. He turned around and resumed his march up the trail. "You refuse to walk. We still have 3 miles to cover." "I will walk," Hazel shouted, kicking her legs. "Drop me right now." "You had your chance," Leonard replied. His voice did not shake. The exertion of carrying her up a mountain did not affect his breathing at all. He treated her weight like nothing. Hazel pounded her fists against his shoulder blades. It felt like hitting a brick wall. She grabbed a fistful of his shirt and yanked. He ignored her completely. She stopped fighting and hung there in defeat. Blood rushed to her head. The embarrassment burned her cheeks. She wanted to provoke him into anger, but instead, she ended up slung over him like a sack of stolen goods. "You are a tyrant," she muttered. "I am efficient," he corrected. He carried her for another mile. The rhythm of his steps bounced her against his shoulder. She crossed her arms, fuming in silence. She realized arguing with him was useless. He never lost his temper. He just changed the rules to fit his game. She stared at the dirt path moving beneath them. She had to find a new way to break his patience. She needed a plan that hit him where he actually cared. Chapter 8. The packhouse laundry room sat deep in the basement. It smelled like harsh chemical detergent and damp cotton. Metal pipes lined the ceiling. Industrial washing machines hummed in a loud, vibrating chorus. Hazel slipped through the doorway. She carried her green canvas bag strapped tight to her shoulder. Bandit poked his head out of the flap, his nose twitching at the strong smells. She walked down the row of rolling laundry carts. She found the one she wanted. It sat next to the folding tables. Inside the cart rested a stack of Leonard's crisp, white, button-down shirts. They were spotless and perfectly pressed. She reached into a cabinet under a deep utility sink. She pulled out a heavy plastic jug of industrial bleach. The yellow warning label promised severe fabric damage. Hazel unscrewed the child-proof cap. The sharp fumes stung her nose. She grabbed one of the pristine shirts. She laid it flat across the metal folding table. She lifted the heavy jug, ready to ruin the expensive fabric. "Do you need a measuring cup for that?" a deep voice asked. Hazel jumped. The jug slipped in her grip, Bleach splashed onto the concrete floor. Leonard leaned against the metal doorframe. He had his arms crossed over his chest. He watched her with that same infuriating, calm expression. Hazel set the jug down on the table. She refused to look guilty. She squared her shoulders and faced him. "I am doing laundry, being helpful, earning my keep." "With industrial-grade bleach," Leonard noted. He walked into the room. His heavy boots crunched against the spilled chemicals on the floor. "White clothes get dirty fast," Hazel said. She grabbed the collar of the shirt. "I wanted to make sure they got clean." Leonard stopped at the edge of the metal table. He looked at the shirt, then at the open jug of bleach. He looked at Hazel's defiant face. He reached out and grabbed the handle of the plastic jug. Hazel tightened her grip on the shirt collar, ready to fight him for it. She prepared for the lecture. She waited for him to drag her out of the room for destroying his property. Leonard did not pull the shirt away. He lifted the heavy jug and poured a thick stream of raw bleach straight onto the center of the fabric. Hazel let go of the collar and stepped back in shock. The harsh chemicals soaked the white cotton. The fabric hissed. A sickly yellow stain spread across the material, eating through the delicate fibers. The expensive shirt was completely ruined in seconds. Leonard set the jug back on the table. He looked at the destroyed clothing. "I always hated the stiff collars on those," he said. He looked up at Hazel. "Did you want to do the rest of the pile, or should I?" Hazel stared at him. Her mouth fell open. She looked at the ruined shirt, then at the calm Alpha King. The fun drained right out of the room. The rebellion felt hollow. "You are ruining it," Hazel complained. "Ruining what?" Leonard asked. "The fight," she snapped. She grabbed the strap of her canvas bag and pulled it tight against her chest. "You are supposed to get angry. You are supposed to scream at me and tell me I am a menace to your perfect life." Leonard stepped closer to her. The harsh fluorescent light caught the gold flecks in his amber eyes. "I don't want a perfect life, Hazel. I want you." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. The air vanished from her lungs. She stared at him, unable to find a single sarcastic comeback. She turned around and bolted for the door, leaving him standing next to the ruined pile of clothes. Chapter 9. The heavy oak doors of the grand hall swung wide. The brass hinges groaned. 4 unfamiliar guards marched into the room, their boots striking the stone floor in unison. Behind them walked rival Alpha Sylvan. Sylvan wore a tailored gray suit. He had pale hair and cold, calculating eyes. He sneered at the tapestries hanging on the walls. He walked with an arrogant swagger, expecting everyone in the room to bow. Hazel sat on a stone windowsill in the corner. She chewed on the end of a splintered wooden pencil. Her green canvas bag rested beside her hip. She wore her combat boots, the flannel shirt, and the dark denim jeans with the ragged holes she slashed over the knees. She watched the newcomers with pure boredom. Leonard stood at the head of the room. He wore a crisp black shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal his scarred forearms. The platinum signet ring rested on his finger. He did not step down from the raised platform. He waited for Sylvan to approach. "Leonard," Sylvan greeted. His voice echoed in the cold hall. He did not bow. "Sylvan," Leonard replied. His tone held zero warmth. "You crossed my borders unannounced." "I heard rumors," Sylvan said. He paced around the long wooden table. "Rumors that the King of the West took in a pet. I had to see this for myself. I expected a prized wolf, a champion." Sylvan stopped pacing. His cold eyes locked onto Hazel in the corner. He looked her up and down, taking in the frayed threads of her jeans and the scuff marks on her boots. He let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Is this the prize?" Sylvan asked. He pointed a finger at Hazel. "A stray? She looks like she crawled out of a gutter. You let this filth sleep under your roof?" Hazel stopped chewing her pencil. She pulled it from her mouth and tossed it into her canvas bag. She slid off the windowsill. Her boots hit the floor with a heavy thud. She did not shrink away from the rival Alpha. She walked straight toward him. "Watch your mouth," Hazel warned. "I might look rough, but I don't smell like a wet dog dipped in cheap cologne." The foreign guards growled. They took a step toward her. Sylvan held up a hand to stop his men. He looked down at Hazel. A cruel smile twisted his lips. You have a sharp tongue for a wolf without a pack. In my territory, we discipline strays who forget their place. We teach them respect with the end of a whip." Hazel tilted her head. She offered him a wicked, fearless smile. "In my territory, pompous men in gray suits get their teeth knocked out for talking too much. Good thing we are not in your territory." Sylvan's face turned bright red. The arrogant smile vanished. His jaw clenched tight. The disrespect struck a nerve. He let out a feral snarl and lunged forward. He aimed a heavy hand toward Hazel's throat, intending to grab her and force her to the floor. Hazel braced her legs, ready to fight. A blur of motion tore across the room. Leonard materialized between them. The king moved with lethal, terrifying speed. He did not shout. He did not posture. He grabbed Sylvan's wrist in midair. The impact cracked like a breaking branch. Sylvan let out a choked gasp. He tried to yank his arm back. Leonard held his grip tight, his knuckles turning white. "Touch her," Leonard whispered, his voice dark and dangerous, "and you will leave my estate in pieces." Sylvan's guards drew their weapons. Leonard's guards drew theirs. The click of metal locking into place echoed across the stone walls. The grand hall transformed into a powder keg. Hazel stood right behind Leonard. She looked at the broad expanse of his back. He stood like a stone wall, unmoving and unbreakable. He did not even glance at the weapons pointed in his direction. Sylvan's chest heaved, sweat beaded on his pale forehead. He stared into Leonard's amber eyes and found zero hesitation. Leonard was ready to start a war right there on the polished floor. "Call off your men," Leonard ordered. The command rolled through the room, heavy with alpha authority. Sylvan swallowed hard. He gave a sharp nod to his guards. The men lowered their weapons, stepping back in defeat. Leonard released Sylvan's wrist. He shoved the rival alpha's arm away. Sylvan stumbled back a step. He rubbed his bruised skin, glaring at Leonard. "You insult our traditions. You protect a stray over an ally. The council will hear about this." "Tell them whatever you want," Leonard stated. He turned his back on the rival alpha. He placed a hand on the small of Hazel's back. The heat of his palm burned through her flannel shirt. "Get out of my house, Sylvan." The rival alpha sneered, spun on his heel, and marched out the double doors with his men in tow. Hazel stepped away from his touch. She grabbed the thick strap of her green canvas bag and pulled it tighter across her chest. The interaction confused her. He risked a pack war for her. He did not scold her for insulting a visiting alpha. He defended her. "You should have let me punch him," Hazel said, breaking the silence. "You would have broken your knuckles on his jaw," Leonard replied. He walked past her, heading back to his ledger on the table. "He has a thick skull." "I hit hard," Hazel argued, following him. "I know," Leonard answered. He sat down in the dark oak chair and picked up his pen. "But I prefer to handle the trash myself." Hazel stood by the table, staring at him. The prank war felt foolish now. Every time she pushed him, he pulled her closer. She realized she needed a new strategy. Fighting him with chaos only amused him. If she wanted him to reject her, she had to take away the one thing he seemed to enjoy, her voice. The rebellion was over. The silence would begin tomorrow. Chapter 10. Morning rain lashed against the tall windows of the pack house. Hazel walked into the dining room. She wore her ripped jeans and a faded black t-shirt. Her canvas bag hung from her shoulder. Bandit remained upstairs, asleep in a nest of blankets. Leonard sat at the head of the table. He drank dark coffee from a ceramic mug. He looked up when she entered. "Good morning," Leonard said. Hazel did not answer. She pulled out a wooden chair. The legs scraped loud against the floorboards. She sat down, picked up a slice of toast, and stared at the rain hitting the glass. Leonard set his mug down. "Did you sleep well?" Hazel bit into the toast. She chewed with slow, deliberate bites. She kept her eyes on the storm outside. A long minute passed. The only sound in the room was the rain and the clink of silverware. "Are we playing a new game?" Leonard asked. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. Hazel ignored him. She wiped a crumb off her mouth, stood up, and walked out of the room. She left her half-eaten toast on the plate. The silent treatment lasted through the afternoon. Hazel sat on a stone bench in the covered courtyard. The cold air bit at her exposed knees through the jagged holes in her denim. She held a sketchbook on her lap, drawing the dark pine trees in the distance with her wooden pencil. Leonard found her an hour later. He carried a heavy leather ledger. He sat down on the opposite end of the stone bench. He did not say a word. He opened the ledger and started reading. Hazel clenched her jaw. She wanted to tell him to go away. She wanted to ask why he had to follow her everywhere. She swallowed the words. She flipped a page in her sketchbook and continued drawing, pressing the graphite hard against the paper. Another hour passed. The silence between them grew heavy. It was not a peaceful silence. It felt like a stretched rubber band ready to snap. "Martha wants you banned from the West Wing," Leonard stated without looking up from his book. "She claims your ripped clothing is a distraction to the guards." Hazel gripped her pencil. She wanted to unleash a sarcastic insult about Martha. She forced her lips to stay shut. Leonard closed the ledger. He turned his head and studied her profile. "I told her the guards need to learn focus." Hazel did not react. She shaded a dark cloud on her paper. Leonard stood up from the bench. He stepped closer, casting a shadow over her sketchbook. "You can yell at me, Hazel. You can tie my shoes together. You can pour bleach on my clothes, but do not ignore me." Hazel kept her head down. She traced the same line over and over until the paper threatened to tear. She proved she could break his patience. She just had to hold out. Leonard let out a sharp, frustrated breath. He turned and walked back inside the pack house. By nightfall, the silence drove Leonard to the edge. Hazel walked down the dim, quiet corridor toward her room. The pack house staff had gone to sleep. Only the wall sconces provided light. She carried her canvas bag, her boots making soft thumps on the carpet runner. She reached the corner of the hallway. A tall shadow stepped out from the intersecting corridor, blocking her path. Hazel stopped short. Her boots skidded on the rug. She looked up. Leonard stood in front of her. He wore a dark, fitted shirt that stretched across his chest. His amber eyes burned with intense focus. The calm, unbothered king was gone. A dangerous, restless energy rolled off him. He took a step forward. Hazel took a step back. "Speak to me," Leonard commanded, his voice dropping to a rough gravel pitch. Hazel locked her jaw. She shook her head and tried to step around him. Leonard shifted his weight, blocking her escape. He trapped her in the narrow space between the stone wall and his broad chest. The game of silence had worked too well. Hazel gripped the strap of her canvas bag. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The air around them grew thick and charged. She refused to open her mouth. She stared at the center of his chest, avoiding his burning gaze. Leonard placed a hand flat against the stone wall beside her head. He leaned in, trapping her in his shadow. "I am done playing this game, Hazel." She pressed her back against the cold stone, her lips pressed tight, knowing the standoff had just reached a dangerous boiling point. Chapter 11. Leonard loomed over her. His hand remained planted flat on the stone wall beside her ear. He boxed her in. The narrow corridor offered zero room for escape. Hazel kept her back pressed hard against the cold stone. She gripped the thick strap of her green canvas bag with both hands. Her knuckles turned white. She stared at the dark fabric of his shirt. She refused to look up. She refused to speak. "Look at me," Leonard demanded. The quiet command held a rough, dangerous edge. Hazel squeezed her eyes shut. She shook her head, a stubborn refusal. Leonard stepped closer. The gap between them vanished. The heat radiating from his body washed over her. The scent of cedar and black pepper wrapped around her senses, thick and intoxicating. It clouded her judgment. "Hazel," he said. His voice dropped to a low, rough whisper. It vibrated in the tight space. She opened her eyes and tilted her chin up. She met his gaze. His amber eyes burned with a fierce, possessive fire. The unbothered, patient king was gone. The raw, primal alpha stood in his place. "I let you ruin my meetings," Leonard stated. He kept his voice low, forcing her to listen. "I let your ferret bite my guards and steal my jewelry. I let you destroy my clothes. I let you mock me in front of my elders." Hazel swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry. She maintained the silence, holding on to her final weapon. "I let you do all of that. Leonard continued, his gaze dropping to her lips for a fraction of a second. Because it meant you were paying attention to me. Hazel's breath hitched. Her chest rose and fell in quick, shallow bursts. The confession knocked the fight right out of her. But this, Leonard said, his jaw clenching. He moved his face inches from hers. This silence. I will not accept this. You do not get to shut me out. Hazel opened her mouth. The stubborn wall cracked. Then kick me out. Her voice came out breathless and quiet. Leonard let out a harsh sound. It was half laugh, half growl. He lowered his hand from the stone wall and grabbed her hips. His large fingers dug into the thick denim of her jeans. He pulled her flush against his chest. Hazel gasped. Her hands flew up, pressing against his solid chest to keep her balance. The canvas bag slipped off her shoulder and dropped to the floor with a heavy thud. I am never letting you go, Leonard promised. The space between them crackled with tension. The fight drained away, replaced by a heavy, suffocating heat. Hazel stared into his eyes, her pulse racing. She could feel the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart beating against her palms. She wanted to push him away. She wanted to yell and demand her freedom. But her hands stayed flat against his shirt. Her body betrayed her mind. The mate bond pulled at her, stronger than ever before. Leonard lifted his hand. He brushed a stray lock of auburn hair away from her face. His knuckles grazed her cheek. The touch sent a spark of electricity straight down her spine. Say something, Leonard urged, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. Insult me, argue with me, do not stay quiet. Hazel stared at his mouth. Her defenses crumbled into dust. You are an arrogant, stubborn brute. Leonard smirked. The familiar, arrogant confidence returned to his face. Better. He leaned in closer. His lips hovered a breath away from hers. The anticipation made Hazel dizzy. She tilted her head, ready to close the final distance. She wanted him to kiss her. A loud crash echoed from the floor below. Glass shattered, wood splintered. Leonard froze. His head snapped toward the sound. The romantic haze vanished in a split second. His amber eyes turned cold and lethal. Hazel grabbed his arms, her heart leaping into her throat. What was that? Leonard stepped back. He dropped his hands from her hips. He turned toward the grand staircase. Stay here. Hazel bent down and grabbed her canvas bag from the floor. She slung the thick strap over her shoulder. She glared at his back. Not a chance. She ran down the hallway right behind him, racing toward the chaos. Chapter 12. Hazel chased Leonard down the grand staircase. Her combat boots slammed against the wooden steps. Leonard moved with terrifying speed, clearing the stairs in 3 massive bounds. They rushed toward the east wing, following the sound of the destruction. They reached the open double doors of the Royal Library. Leonard stopped in the doorway. Hazel bumped into his solid back. She peeked around his shoulder to see the carnage. A priceless crystal globe lay shattered on the floor, surrounded by broken pieces of a wooden pedestal. Books spilled across the expensive rug. High above them, near the vaulted ceiling, Bandit chattered a frantic warning. Hazel looked up. The Royal Library housed towering oak bookshelves that stretched 2 stories high. Bandit perched on the very top edge of the highest shelf. The ferret paced back and forth, looking down at the mess he created. He clutched a stolen silver fountain pen in his mouth. Bandit! Hazel yelled. The ferret dropped the pen. It clattered down the shelves, bouncing off leather-bound books until it hit the floor near Leonard's boots. Leonard looked at the silver pen, then up at the ceiling. The lethal tension drained out of his shoulders, replaced by deep exhaustion. He pinched the bridge of his nose. Your rat is going to destroy my entire house. He got spooked, Hazel defended. She walked into the room, stepping carefully over the broken glass. She looked up at the towering shelf. I have to get him down before he jumps. I will send a guard with a ladder, Leonard said. No, Hazel argued. She dropped her green canvas bag onto a reading table. Your guards hate him. They will probably shake him loose on purpose. She spotted a tall, rolling wooden ladder attached to a brass rail on the wall. The ladder offered access to the highest shelves. Hazel jogged over to it. She grabbed the wooden rungs and pulled. The small wheels squeaked as it rolled along the brass track. She positioned it right under Bandit. "Hazel, step away from the ladder," Leonard warned. He walked into the room, his boots crunching on glass. "The track is old. It cannot support sudden movements." "I climb fire escapes for fun," Hazel shot back. She grabbed the sides of the ladder and put her boot on the first rung. "I will be fine." She started climbing. The wood creaked under her weight. She moved fast, scaling the rungs without looking down. She climbed 10 feet in the air, 15 feet. She reached the top section of the ladder. Bandit peeked over the edge of the shelf. He let out a pathetic squeak. "Come here, you menace," Hazel coaxed. She reached one hand out, keeping her left hand gripped tight on the ladder. Bandit stretched his long body toward her hand. Hazel leaned back, stretching her arm to grab his scruff. Her right boot shifted on the wooden rung. A loud crack echoed through the library. The brass track on the walls snapped. The metal gave way under the shifting weight. The top wheels of the ladder derailed. The ladder lurched backward, tilting away from the wall. Hazel gasped. Her hand slipped off the wood. Gravity ripped her backward into empty space. The heavy wooden ladder crashed to the floor, missing her by inches. She fell. The ceiling rushed away from her. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the brutal impact of the stone floor. The impact never came. Two strong, unbreakable arms caught her midair. The force of the catch knocked the breath from her lungs. She collided with a solid chest. Leonard held her tight against his body. He stood firm and balanced among the broken glass. He caught her 20-foot fall like she weighed nothing at all. Hazel opened her eyes, gasping for air. Her hands gripped his shoulders. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Leonard stared down at her. His amber eyes blazed with panic and fury. His chest heaved. He held her so tight she could feel the metal buttons of his shirt pressing into her arm. "Do you ever listen?" Leonard demanded. His voice shook with raw fear. Hazel stared at him, still reeling from the fall. She realized he was not angry about the broken crystal or the ladder. He was terrified she almost died. Bandit scurried down the broken shelves, hopped onto the floor, and darted under a chair, leaving the mess behind. Leonard did not put her down. He tightened his grip, burying his face into the curve of her neck, breathing in her scent to calm the beast inside him. Chapter 13. The midday sun cast long shadows across the guest room floor. Hazel sat on the edge of the mattress, tossing a piece of dried shrimp into the air. Bandit leaped from the pillows, caught the treat in his teeth, and landed with a soft thump on the blanket. He let out a satisfied chirp and scurried into her green canvas bag to eat his prize. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. A sharp knock hit the wooden door. Before Hazel could speak, the door swung open. Elder Martha marched into the room. The older woman wore a stiff, high-collared gray gown. 2 royal guards followed her, carrying a wide, flat garment box covered in black velvet. Martha gestured to the bed. "Put it down." The guards set the heavy box on the mattress right next to Hazel. They stepped back and left the room, pulling the door shut behind them. Hazel did not stand up. She looked at the velvet box, then at the elder. "I did not order anything." "The royal ball begins at 8 o'clock, Martha stated. She laced her fingers together. Her sharp cheekbones looked sharper in the harsh light. "King Leonard requires your presence. He selected this garment for you. You will wear it, and you will stand quietly by his side." Hazel nudged the box with her combat boot. "I don't go to balls, I don't dance, and I definitely don't take fashion advice from a council of stuffy elders." Martha's nostrils flared. "You are a stray living under a royal roof. You will follow our traditions. The king demands it. Do not embarrass us tonight." The elder turned on her heel and swept out of the room, slamming the door shut. Hazel glared at the closed door. She grabbed the edge of the velvet box and pulled the lid off. Inside, surrounded by crisp tissue paper, lay a dark red dress. The heavy silk fabric shimmered in the sunlight. It had a high neckline, long sleeves, and a floor-length hem. It was a modest, traditional gown designed to make her blend into the background. It was a cage made of silk. Hazel gripped the fabric and pulled the dress out of the box. It felt heavy in her hands. The deep red color reminded her of spilled blood. She held it up against her chest and looked in the tall standing mirror. The dress swallowed her. It hid her boots. It hid her scarred knees. It turned her into a perfect, obedient pack member. She tossed the dress onto the bed. She walked over to the wooden desk in the corner of the room. She pulled the top drawer open. The sharp sewing scissors she used on her jeans rested next to a stack of blank paper. Hazel grabbed the metal handles. The scissors felt cold against her palm. She walked back to the bed. She picked up the dark red dress and laid it flat across the mattress. She smoothed the heavy silk out, finding the bottom edge of the hem. "They want a traditional pack member," Hazel said aloud. Bandit poked his head out of the canvas bag, his whiskers twitching at the sound of her voice. Hazel drove the sharp blades of the scissors into the bottom hem of the dark red silk. The fabric resisted for a second, then gave way with a crisp, satisfying tear. She clamped her jaw and pushed the blades forward. She cut a straight line up the left side of the dress. She sliced past the ankle. She cut past the knee. She did not stop until the blades reached her mid-thigh. She tossed the scissors onto the nightstand. She held the dress up by the shoulders. The long, scandalous slit gaped open, ruining the modest design entirely. The heavy fabric would now flare open with every single step she took, exposing her bare leg and her scuffed combat boots. She dropped the dress back onto the mattress. She rolled up the sleeves of her faded flannel shirt. She had hours to kill before the music started. She planned to make the king regret inviting her. Chapter 14. The grand hall transformed into a blinding spectacle of wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the crowd. An orchestra played a slow, sweeping waltz from the raised platform in the corner. Pack elders and high-ranking wolves wore their finest suits and sweeping ball gowns. The room hummed with polite conversation and the clink of champagne glasses. Hazel stood at the top of the grand staircase. She looked down at the sea of formal attire. She wore the dark red dress. The heavy silk clung to her ribs and cascaded down to the floor. The high neckline and long sleeves offered a false sense of tradition. She took her first step down the wooden stairs. The fabric parted. Her combat boots struck the polished wood. The jagged, thigh-high slit flared open, exposing her bare leg to the entire room. A female elder near the bottom of the stairs gasped. The sound cut through the music. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. The polite humming died out, replaced by a tense, heavy silence. Hundreds of eyes locked onto the stray descending the royal staircase. Hazel kept her chin high. She did not rush. She took her time, letting her heavy boots thud against the wood in a steady, rebellious rhythm. She reached the bottom step and walked straight into the crowd. The wolves parted for her. Nobody wanted to touch her. They whispered behind their hands, glaring at the ruined hem of her dress. At the far end of the hall, King Leonard stood with a group of visiting alphas. He wore a sharp black tuxedo. The dark fabric stretched tight across his broad shoulders. He held a crystal glass in his hand. He heard the silence. He turned his head. His amber eyes found Hazel in the center of the room. His gaze dropped to the scandalous slit in the red silk. He saw the scuffed leather of her combat boots. He saw the defiance burning in her expression. Leonard handed his glass to a guard. He did not say a word to the visiting alphas. He stepped away from the group and walked straight toward Hazel. The crowd scattered, making a wide path for their king. Leonard stopped 2 feet in front of her. The tension in the room grew thick enough to choke on. The elders waited for the king to banish her from the hall for destroying the royal gift. Hazel crossed her arms. She stared at the center of his chest. "I made some alterations. The hem was dragging." Leonard tilted his head. His eyes darkened, the gold flecks burning with a fierce, possessive heat. He did not look at her boots. He did not look at the torn silk. He looked at her face. He reached out and grabbed her left hand. Hazel stiffened. She tried to pull her fingers back, but his grip held firm. Leonard placed his right hand flat against the curve of her waist. His long fingers pressed into the red silk, resting right above the start of the jagged slit. The heat of his palm burned through the fabric. "Dance with me," Leonard commanded. His voice carried a rough gravel pitch that sent a shiver down her spine. "I don't know the steps," Hazel argued, keeping her voice low. Follow my lead, he countered. He pulled her flush against his chest. The orchestra, taking the cue from their king, started a new, sweeping melody. Leonard moved backward, pulling Hazel into the center of the empty dance floor. She stumbled on her first step. Her combat boot caught the edge of his polished shoe. Leonard did not break his stride. He tightened his arm around her waist, lifting her slightly to correct her balance. He spun her across the floor. The heavy red silk flared open, flashing her bare leg in time with the music. Hazel gripped his shoulder. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She stared into his amber eyes, lost in the suffocating heat radiating between them. "You are supposed to be angry," Hazel whispered, her breath hitching. Leonard pulled her closer, his jaw brushing against her temple. "You look stunning, Hazel, and I love that you kept the boots." Chapter 15. The music swelled, filling the grand hall. Hazel followed Leonard's steps, her combat boots sliding across the polished floor. The dark red silk wrapped around their legs. The fierce heat of his hand on her waist made her dizzy. She kept her gaze locked on the silver buttons of his tuxedo jacket, unable to look into his burning amber eyes. A heavy hand clamped down on Hazel's bare shoulder. The intrusion shattered the tension. Hazel gasped and stumbled. Leonard stopped dancing instantly. His arm tightened around her waist, anchoring her to his side. Rival Alpha Sylvan stood right next to them. Sylvan wore a dark gray suit. He favored his left arm. A thick leather brace wrapped tight around his right wrist, a brutal reminder of the bone Leonard cracked yesterday. A smug, arrogant smile twisted Sylvan's pale face. "Mind if I cut in?" Sylvan asked. He did not wait for an answer. He used his good left hand to grab Hazel's waist. He shoved his fingers into the red silk, gripping her too hard. He yanked her toward him, trying to tear her out of Leonard's hold. "Let go of me," Hazel warned. She slammed her hands against Sylvan's chest, pushing back against his grip. Sylvan sneered. He shifted his grip, digging the fingers of his good left hand harder into her waist while pressing the stiff leather of his braced right forearm against her collarbone to trap her. A stray should learn to dance with all the pack leaders, not just the ones who buy her pretty dresses. Hazel bared her teeth. She brought her heavy combat boot up and stomped down hard on Sylvan's polished shoe. Sylvan grunted. His left hand jerked up and clamped down on her bicep, his fingers bruising her flesh. Hazel bared her teeth. She brought her heavy combat boot up and stomped down hard on Sylvan's polished shoe. Sylvan grunted. His grip on her bicep tightened, his fingers bruising her flesh. "You wild little..." Leonard moved. He did not issue a warning. He did not growl. He grabbed Sylvan by the throat with his right hand. The sheer force of the impact lifted Sylvan off his feet. Leonard threw the rival Alpha backward. Sylvan flew through the air and crashed into a long table covered in crystal champagne flutes. The table collapsed. Glass shattered in a deafening explosion. Champagne sprayed across the floorboards. The music stopped abruptly. The crowd shrieked and scrambled away from the wreckage. Sylvan lay in the ruin of wood and broken glass. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead. He groaned, clutching his braced wrist. Leonard stood in the center of the dance floor. His chest heaved. His amber eyes shifted to a glowing, lethal gold. He stepped over a piece of broken crystal and stalked toward the fallen Alpha. Sylvan's 4 foreign guards drew their weapons, rushing toward their leader. The royal guards intercepted them. Blades cleared sheaths, rifles aimed. The grand hall turned into a battlefield in seconds. Hazel stood frozen, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. She rubbed her bruised bicep. "Leonard, stop!" Elder Martha yelled from the edge of the crowd. "You will start a war over this stray!" Leonard ignored the elder. He reached the broken table. He looked down at Sylvan. He leaned over, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that carried across the silent hall. "I warned you not to touch her," Leonard said. "You cross my borders. You lay hands on my mate. This is an act of war." Sylvan spat blood onto the floorboards. He glared up at the king. "You claim a stray as your queen. You make your own pack look weak. I will enjoy tearing your territory apart." "Try it," Leonard challenged. He turned his back on the bleeding man. He looked at his royal guards. "Escort them to the gates. If they resist, kill them." Leonard walked back to Hazel. He did not check her for injuries in front of the crowd. He grabbed her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. His grip felt like iron. He pulled her away from the dance floor, leading her out of the grand hall and into the dark corridors of the pack house, leaving the chaos behind them. Chapter 16. The heavy oak door of the king's office slammed shut. The noise echoed in the quiet room. Leonard released Hazel's hand. He paced across the dark patterned rug. The tension rolled off him in suffocating waves. Hazel stood near the entrance. She rubbed the bruised skin on her bicep where Sylvan had grabbed her. She watched Leonard pace. His tuxedo jacket hung open. The top button of his white shirt was undone. "He touched you," Leonard snarled to the empty room. He kicked the leg of a heavy leather chair. The chair skidded across the rug. "I should have ripped his throat out." "I stomped on his foot," Hazel pointed out. She tried to keep her voice steady. "I had it handled." Leonard stopped pacing. He turned his head and glared at her. "He bruised your arm. He put his hands on you. You do not have it handled." He walked behind his massive oak desk. He gripped the edge of the wood, leaning forward. His breathing sounded ragged and harsh in the quiet room. Hazel stepped further into the office. The dim light from the desk lamp illuminated his face. She noticed a thin, bright red line on his jaw. A sharp piece of flying crystal from the shattered table must have caught his skin during the chaos. A single drop of dark blood swelled at the edge of the cut. Hazel walked toward the desk. She spotted a clean white cloth folded neatly on a silver serving tray holding a decanter of water. She picked up the cloth. She walked around the edge of the desk. She stepped right into his personal space. Leonard stiffened. He watched her approach, his golden eyes tracking her every move. He did not step back. Hazel reached up. She pressed the white cloth against his jaw. Leonard's breath hitched. His eyes locked onto hers. Hazel dabbed at the drop of blood. Her knuckles brushed against his warm skin. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight up her arm. She kept her eyes focused on the small cut, refusing to look at his mouth. "You are bleeding," Hazel whispered. The silence in the office made her voice sound too loud. "It heals fast," Leonard replied. His voice dropped to a rough gravel pitch. He did not move his head away from her touch. Hazel lowered the cloth. She saw the blood stain on the white fabric. She started to step back. Leonard reached out. He wrapped his large hand around her wrist, stopping her retreat. He pulled her forward. Her knees bumped against his thighs. Hazel gasped. The heavy, dark red silk of her dress pooled around their legs. The scandalous slit exposed her bare thigh against his dark trousers. Leonard lifted his other hand. He cupped the side of her face. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone, tracing the line of her jaw. His touch felt surprisingly gentle, a sharp contrast to the violent fury he showed in the ballroom. "Why did you alter the dress?" Leonard asked. His gaze dropped to her lips. Hazel swallowed hard. The air in her lungs vanished. "I hate following rules." "I know," Leonard murmured. He leaned down. The distance between them shrank to a fraction of an inch. She felt the warmth of his breath against her mouth. "You drive me insane, Hazel." Hazel closed her eyes. The mate bond pulled at her, a physical force dragging her toward him. She tilted her chin up, surrendering to the overwhelming heat. She wanted the kiss. She wanted him to close the distance. A loud, frantic knock hammered against the heavy oak door. Hazel jolted backward, ripping her wrist out of his grip. She stumbled against the edge of the desk, her heart hammering a wild rhythm in her chest. Leonard squeezed his eyes shut. A deep, frustrated growl vibrated in his chest. He dropped his hands to his sides, his fists clenching tight. "My king!" a muffled voice shouted through the thick wood. "The border alarms! Sylvan's pack is breaching the eastern line!" Leonard opened his eyes. The raw desire vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating stare of a wartime alpha. He looked at Hazel, his jaw set like stone. The slow burn had to wait. The war had arrived. Chapter 17. The royal guards burst through the heavy oak doors of the office. Their heavy boots thundered against the rug. Leonard dropped his fists to his sides. He turned away from Hazel and faced his men. "Sylvan's pack breached the eastern tree line," the lead guard reported, gasping for breath. They used the storm for cover. We need you at the front gates, my king. Leonard did not look back at Hazel. The Alpha took control. He marched out of the office, his guards flanking him. The door swung shut, leaving Hazel alone in the quiet room. Thunder rattled the thick window panes. A brutal rainstorm battered the estate grounds outside. Hazel stared at the blood-stained white cloth resting on the broad desk. The estate was in chaos. The guards were distracted. Leonard was gone. She had her window. She turned and sprinted out of the office. She navigated the dark corridors, avoiding the grand staircase where the pack elders still panicked over the ruined ballroom. She took the servant stairs up to the third floor. She pushed the door to her guest room open. Bandit popped his head out of the green canvas bag resting on the floor. He chattered a greeting. "We are leaving," Hazel told the ferret. She reached behind her back and unzipped the dark red silk dress. She let the heavy fabric fall to the floor in a crumpled heap. She stepped out of it, kicking it away from her boots. She grabbed her faded flannel shirt and pulled it over her head. She pulled the slashed, dark denim jeans up her legs. The familiar clothes felt like armor. She rolled up her flannel sleeves. A dark purple bruise stained her bicep where Sylvan had gripped her. The muscle throbbed with a dull ache. She ignored the pain. She grabbed the thick strap of her green canvas bag and slung it over her shoulder. Bandit curled into a tight ball at the bottom, burying himself beneath the bag of dried shrimp and her wooden pencils. Hazel slipped out of the room. She crept down the back stairs and pushed through the kitchen doors. She stepped out into the freezing night. The storm hit her like a physical blow. Cold rain soaked her auburn hair in seconds. Water plastered her flannel shirt to her skin. The wind howled through the tall pine trees. She kept to the shadows along the edge of the driveway. Mud sucked at her combat boots. She reached the front gates. The tall iron bars stood wide open. The security booth sat empty. The guards had abandoned their post to join the fight at the eastern border. The silver wire glistening at the top of the fence did not matter anymore. The path was clear. Hazel walked through the open gates. She stepped off the royal estate and onto the slick, dark asphalt of the main road. She did not look back. She marched down the center of the road. The rain fell in sheets, blinding her vision. The cold seeped into her bones, making her teeth chatter. Her bruised bicep ached under the weight of the heavy canvas bag. She wrapped her arms around her ribs to preserve her body heat. She had no destination. She only knew she had to keep walking. She trudged through the storm for a mile. The road stretched out in pitch blackness. Total isolation surrounded her. A pair of bright headlights cut through the driving rain. Hazel squinted. The lights approached from behind her, moving slow and steady. She stepped toward the edge of the asphalt, giving the vehicle room to pass. The engine let out a low, powerful rumble. The vehicle did not pass her. It crept alongside her, matching her slow, freezing pace. Hazel wiped the rainwater from her eyes. The midnight blue Aston Martin rolled to a stop right next to her. The sleek metal gleamed under the headlights. The passenger side window slid down with a quiet mechanical hum. Leonard sat behind the steering wheel. He still wore his dark tuxedo trousers and the white shirt. He did not look angry. He looked out into the freezing storm, his amber eyes locking onto her shivering form. Chapter 18. Rain lashed against the Aston Martin. Water poured through the open passenger window, soaking the expensive leather seat. Hazel stood on the asphalt, shivering violently. Water dripped from her eyelashes and ran down her neck. She tightened her grip on the canvas bag strap, her knuckles turning white from the cold. Leonard leaned across the center console. He kept his hands away from the steering wheel. "Get in." Hazel shook her head. Her wet hair whipped across her face. She took a step back, putting distance between herself and the car. "I am not going back!" Hazel shouted over the roar of the storm. "You have a war to fight! Go defend your borders!" Leonard did not raise his voice. His deep tone cut right through the howling wind. "I am not taking you back." Hazel froze. She stared at him, water streaming down her face. "You want to leave," Leonard stated. He gestured to the empty passenger seat. "Get in the car. I will drive you to the city limits. I will drive you past the borders. I will take you wherever you want to go, and I will leave you there." Hazel opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She searched his amber eyes for a trick. She found nothing but raw, uncompromising honesty. He was offering her the exact thing she fought for since the day the guards dragged her into his grand hall. Freedom. She looked down the dark, empty road ahead of her. The wind tore at her wet clothes. The cold bit into her skin. Being a stray meant fighting every battle alone. It meant sleeping in the dirt and running from every threat. She looked back at Leonard. He sat in the warm interior of the car, waiting. He did not issue a command. He gave her a choice. Hazel stepped forward. She grabbed the heavy metal door handle and pulled it open. She slid into the passenger seat and pulled the heavy door shut. The slam echoed in the enclosed space. The storm vanished, replaced by the quiet hum of the powerful engine and the blast of the car heater. Hazel dropped her green canvas bag onto the floorboards. Bandit poked his nose out, sniffing the warm air before retreating into the dry canvas. The heat enveloped her. The scent of cedar and black pepper filled the small cabin, thick and comforting. Hazel leaned back against the leather headrest. Her chest heaved. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for him to put the car in drive and take her away. Leonard shifted the gear selector. The Aston Martin rolled forward. He drove down the dark road, heading away from the estate. They drove in total silence for 10 minutes. The rhythmic swipe of the windshield wipers marked the time. The heater blew warm air over Hazel's frozen hands. She stopped shivering. The dull ache in her bruised bicep eased. She opened her eyes and looked out the window. The dark pine trees blurred past. She looked at Leonard's profile. His jaw was set tight. The small cut from the shattered crystal was already scabbing over, his wolf healing going to work. "Turn around," Hazel whispered. Leonard kept his eyes on the wet road. His grip on the leather steering wheel tightened. "Give me a destination, Hazel." "Take me back," she said. Her voice grew stronger. "Turn the car around." Leonard slammed his foot on the brake pedal. The Aston Martin skidded to a harsh stop in the middle of the empty asphalt. The tires hissed against the wet road. He threw the car into park. He turned in his seat and faced her. His amber eyes burned with a fierce, demanding fire. "Do not play games with me right now," Leonard warned, his voice a low, gravel rumble. "If I turn this car around, I am never letting you leave." Hazel reached across the console. She grabbed the lapel of his white shirt. "Drive!" Leonard grabbed the steering wheel, spun the tires, and whipped the car around in a brutal, screeching turn. Chapter 19. The Aston Martin roared through the open front gates. Leonard bypassed the main driveway and parked the car in the underground garage. He killed the engine. The silence rang in Hazel's ears. Leonard got out of the car. He walked around the hood and opened her door. Hazel grabbed her canvas bag from the floorboards. She stepped out onto the concrete. Leonard did not wait. He placed a hand on the small of her back and guided her toward the private elevator. They rode up to his third-floor suite. Neither of them spoke. The air in the small metal box grew thick and heavy. The elevator doors chimed and slid open. They stepped into the dark corridor. Leonard pushed the heavy carved door of his bedroom open. Hazel walked inside. She dropped her canvas bag onto a heavy wooden chair near the door. Bandit stayed hidden inside. Leonard shut the door behind them. The brass lock clicked into place. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. He turned around. He leaned his shoulders against the thick wood of the door. He crossed his arms over his chest. His wet white shirt clung to his torso. The cut on his jaw was nothing more than a faint pink line now. "Stop fighting," Leonard commanded. His voice filled the dark space. Hazel stood in the center of the rug. Her combat boots left damp prints on the fabric. She crossed her arms, mimicking his stance. "I am not fighting." "You are," Leonard countered. He pushed off the door and took a slow step toward her. "You fight every instinct in your body. You sabotage my clothes. You tie my shoes. You try to run into a freezing storm." He took another step. The distance between them vanished. He stood so close Hazel had to tilt her head back to look into his eyes. "I am a stray," Hazel defended. Her breath hitched in her throat. "I don't belong in a royal pack house." "You belong with me," Leonard stated. He reached out and grabbed her wrists. He pulled her arms apart, breaking her defensive posture. He pinned her hands against his chest. The rapid, powerful thud of his heartbeat hammered against her palms. "Tell me," Leonard demanded. The gold flecks in his eyes flared brighter. "Admit it." "Admit what?" Hazel challenged, her chin lifting. "Admit you feel the pull," he growled. He lowered his head, his mouth hovering a breath above hers. "Admit you stayed because the bond is driving you just as insane as it drives me." The scent of sun-dried linen and sweet orange rolled off her skin, wrapping around him like a vice. Hazel stared at his mouth, her defenses shattered into a million pieces. The stubborn armor dissolved. Hazel twisted her hands in his grip. She grabbed the front of his wet shirt, balling the expensive cotton in her fists. She pulled him down. She crashed her mouth against his. The kiss was fierce and brutal. There was no hesitation. Leonard groaned, a deep, primal sound that vibrated against her lips. He wrapped his arms around her waist and lifted her off her feet. Hazel wrapped her legs around his hips. She tangled her fingers in his dark hair. Leonard carried her across the room. He backed her up against a broad mahogany dresser. The impact rattled the wood. He set her down on the edge of the polished surface. He crowded between her knees, pressing his chest flush against hers. He kissed her jaw, her neck, the spot behind her ear. His hands traced the curve of her spine, pulling her tighter against him. The physical connection cemented the bond, sending a surge of raw electric heat rushing through their veins. Hazel gasped, her fingers digging into his broad shoulders. She surrendered completely to the overwhelming fire, matching his desperate pace in the dark room. Chapter 20. Morning light filtered through the thick gray curtains of the royal suite. Hazel opened her eyes. She lay tangled in the dark sheets of Leonard's massive bed. The mattress was warm, but the space beside her was empty. She sat up, pulling the dark blanket over her bare shoulders. Leonard stood near the window. He wore dark tactical trousers and a fresh black shirt. He strapped a heavy leather holster across his chest. His amber eyes stared out at the estate grounds below. The calm, patient king from the previous days was gone. The warlord had taken over. Hazel swung her legs over the edge of the mattress. She spotted her flannel shirt on the rug. She picked it up and pulled it over her head, buttoning it fast. "Did they breach the gates?" Hazel asked. Leonard turned away from the window. "The Eastern Border Patrol pushed the rogues back into the woods last night. It was a scouting party. A distraction." Hazel frowned. "A distraction from what?" Before Leonard could answer, a loud, ear-piercing siren wailed across the estate. The mechanical shriek rattled the glass in the window panes. Boots thundered in the corridor outside the bedroom. A heavy fist hammered against the thick wood of the door. "My king!" the lead guard yelled through the wood. Panic laced the man's voice. "The inner perimeter is compromised. They bypassed the southern wall." Leonard crossed the room in 3 strides. He ripped the heavy door open. The lead guard stood in the hallway, clutching a rifle. "Sylvan brought an army. They are on the main lawn. They are marching toward the pack house steps." Leonard's jaw clenched. "Secure the elders in the basement vault. Put snipers on the roof." The guard nodded and sprinted back down the hall, barking orders into a handheld radio. Leonard turned back into the room. He walked over to Hazel. He grabbed her upper arms, his grip firm but careful to avoid the dark bruise on her bicep. "Stay in this room," Leonard ordered. Hazel shook her head. She pulled away from his grip. She marched over to the wooden chair by the door and grabbed her green canvas bag. She slung the strap over her shoulder. Bandit poked his head out, his ears pinned back against the loud wailing of the siren. "I am not hiding in a bedroom while a pompous alpha shoots up the front yard," Hazel declared. "Hazel," Leonard warned, a deep growl rumbling in his chest. "Sylvan wants you dead to shame me. You are the target." "I stomped on his foot once," Hazel said, grabbing a wooden pencil from her bag and chewing the end. "I can do it again." Leonard stared at her. The fierce, stubborn fire in her hazel eyes refused to dim. He realized giving her a command to hide was useless. She would just climb out the window. Leonard reached into a locked drawer in the nightstand. He pulled out a thick leather hunting knife and tossed it to her. Hazel caught the heavy handle out of the air. "Stay behind me," Leonard instructed. He drew a weapon from his holster. The gold fire in his eyes blazed bright. "If anyone gets past me, aim for the throat." Hazel gripped the leather handle of the knife. "Lead the way." They stepped out of the bedroom and ran toward the grand staircase. The battle for the royal pack house had begun. Chapter 21. Hazel chased Leonard down the grand staircase. The sounds of combat echoed up from the ground floor. Shouts, the clash of metal, and the heavy thud of bodies hitting the floorboards filled the air. They reached the main foyer. The space was a war zone. Royal guards fought hand-to-hand with Sylvan's rogue wolves. The front double doors hung open, letting the cold morning air rush inside. Mud tracked across the polished hardwood. A rogue with a scarred face lunged toward the stairs, a silver blade glinting in his grip. Leonard did not hesitate. He raised his handgun. The weapon barked, a deafening crack that left Hazel's ears ringing. The rogue dropped to the floor and did not move again. "Keep moving," Leonard ordered. He grabbed Hazel's uninjured arm and pulled her toward the side corridor. "Get to the courtyard. Get out of the crossfire." "I am not leaving you in here," Hazel shouted over the noise. She gripped the thick leather handle of the hunting knife. "I will clear the foyer," Leonard stated. His amber eyes burned with lethal intent. He pushed her toward the heavy glass door leading to the gardens. "Go! Hide in the stone shed." Hazel stumbled forward. She pushed the glass door open and spilled out into the cold. The morning sky hung heavy with gray clouds. The manicured gardens looked eerie and abandoned. She ran down the gravel path. Her combat boots kicked up wet stones. Her bruised bicep throbbed with every step, the weight of her green canvas bag pulling at the sore muscle. She spotted the old stone garden shed at the edge of the property line. It sat near the tall iron fence. Hazel sprinted toward it. She grabbed the rusted iron handle and yanked. The heavy wooden door groaned, scraping against the dirt floor. She slipped inside the dark, cramped space. The air smelled of wet earth and old fertilizer. She pushed the heavy door shut and threw the deadbolt. The lock clicked into place. She backed away from the door, raising the leather hunting knife. Bandit chattered a low, nervous sound from inside her canvas bag. Hazel patted the fabric with her free hand. A heavy thud shook the wooden door. Hazel jumped. Dust fell from the wooden rafters. Another thud hit the wood. A rogue wolf had followed her scent. The attacker rammed his shoulder against the exterior. The thick wood bowed inward. The deadbolt strained against the metal strike plate. "Come on," Hazel whispered, her chest heaving. She bent her knees, readying the blade. The rogue hit the door a third time. A sharp, violent crack split the air. The thick wood fractured down the middle. The force of the blow ripped the rusted iron hinges straight out of the stone frame. The door gave way. It crashed onto the dirt floor of the shed, splintering into jagged, useless pieces. The entryway was destroyed beyond repair. Rain and cold air rushed into the dark space. A towering rogue stood in the doorway. He wiped mud from his chin and sneered at her. He stepped over the broken remains of the door, his boots crushing the splintered wood. "Found the stray," the rogue mocked. He reached out, his thick fingers curling into claws. Hazel did not step back. She lunged forward, thrusting the hunting knife toward his chest. The rogue swatted her arm aside. The block sent a shockwave of pain straight up her bruised bicep. Hazel gritted her teeth, keeping her grip on the leather handle. She spun on her heel, aiming a second strike. Before the rogue could counter, a dark blur launched through the open doorway. Leonard hit the rogue like a runaway freight train. The impact sent both men crashing into the back wall of the stone shed. Rusted gardening tools clattered to the floor. Leonard did not use his weapon. He grabbed the rogue by the collar of his shirt and hurled him out the open doorway. The attacker hit the wet grass outside and rolled. Leonard stalked out of the shed right behind him, his fists balled tight. Hazel ran to the destroyed doorway. She stepped over the broken wood and watched her king dismantle the threat with ruthless, terrifying efficiency. Chapter 22. The rogue tried to scramble to his feet on the wet grass. Leonard did not give him the chance. He delivered a brutal, sweeping kick to the attacker's ribs. The crack of bone echoed across the lawn. The rogue collapsed into the mud and stayed down. Leonard turned around. His black shirt was speckled with mud. He looked at the broken pieces of the wooden door resting in the dirt. He looked at Hazel standing in the entryway, her leather knife still raised. "Are you hurt?" Leonard asked. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. "I am fine," Hazel answered. She stepped out of the shed, leaving the ruined door behind. She kept her grip tight on the knife. The battles spilled out of the pack house. Royal guards and enemy rogues fought across the sprawling back lawn. The pristine landscaping turned into a churned, muddy war zone. Hazel scanned the chaos. Near the edge of the patio, the lead royal guard, the same man Bandit had bitten days ago, was losing ground. 2 enemy wolves backed him against a stone fountain. The guard held a silver-tipped staff, but his foot slipped in the wet mud. He went down on one knee. One of the rogues raised a heavy iron pipe, ready to deliver a crushing blow to the guard's skull. Hazel did not stop to think. She sprinted across the wet grass. Her combat boots dug into the turf. Her canvas bag bounced against her hip. She did not aim for the rogue's chest or arms. She aimed for his balance. Hazel dropped low and slid across the muddy grass. She swung her right leg out in a brutal arc. Her heavy combat boot slammed into the back of the rogue's knees. The impact buckled his legs. The rogue let out a surprised yell. His arms flailed as gravity ripped him backward. He hit the muddy ground hard, the iron pipe flying from his grip and clattering against the stone fountain. The lead guard did not waste the opening. He surged upward, using his silver-tipped staff to strike the second rogue in the chest. The enemy wolf howled and fell back, clutching the burns forming on his skin. The guard turned his attention to the rogue Hazel had tripped. He struck him across the jaw with a heavy wooden end of the staff. The rogue went limp in the mud. Hazel pushed herself up from the wet grass. Her faded flannel shirt was soaked with mud and water. She wiped a streak of dirt from her cheek. She stood ready, holding her leather knife. The lead guard leaned against the stone fountain, catching his breath. He looked down at the unconscious men at his feet. He turned his head and looked at Hazel. The sneer of disgust he usually wore was gone. He looked at her ripped jeans, her mud-caked boots, and the fierce fire in her hazel eyes. She was a stray, but she had just fought dirty to save his life. The guard gave her a single, sharp nod of respect. Hazel nodded back. Leonard jogged over to them. He assessed the fallen enemies, then looked at Hazel's muddy clothes. A proud smirk touched the corner of his mouth. "You fight like a street brawler," Leonard noted. "I fight to win," Hazel corrected. She spun the hunting knife in her hand. "Do they have more men coming?" "No," the lead guard answered. He stood up straight, gripping his staff. "The rest of Sylvan's scouting party is retreating to the tree line. They realize they cannot break our main force." The sounds of combat began to fade across the lawn. The surviving enemy wolves scattered into the dense pine forest, fleeing the royal estate. The royal guards let them run, holding their defensive positions around the pack house. The immediate threat was gone, but the damage was done. The lawn was destroyed. Blood and mud stained the stone patios. The heavy glass doors of the pack house swung open. Elder Martha stepped out onto the patio. 3 other council members followed her, emerging from the safety of the basement vault. Martha wore a pristine gray gown. She looked at the blood on the grass. She looked at the exhausted guards. Then, her sharp gaze locked onto Hazel. Her face twisted into a mask of pure fury. Chapter 23. Elder Martha marched across the stone patio. Her stiff gray gown swept over the wet stones. She stopped a few feet away from Leonard and Hazel. The other council members flanked her, their expressions grim and accusing. The remaining royal guards gathered around the lawn, wiping mud from their faces and tending to minor wounds. The silence in the courtyard grew heavy and tense. Martha pointed a trembling finger directly at Hazel. "Look at this destruction," Martha demanded, her voice shrill in the quiet morning air. "Look at the blood spilled on our grass. This is your fault, Stray. You brought this war to our doorstep." Hazel tightened her grip on the leather hunting knife. She stepped forward to argue, but Leonard extended his arm, blocking her path. "Sylvan brought the war," Leonard corrected. His voice was a low, dangerous rumble. He stood tall, the mud and blood on his black shirt serving as a testament to the fight he just won. "He crossed our borders. He attacked our guards." He attacked because of her, Martha yelled, dropping all formalities. She insulted him in our own hall. She provoked an alpha. Sylvan demands her head. Hand the stray over to him, and this conflict ends today. A murmur of agreement rippled through the other 3 council members. Hazel stared at the elders. A cold knot formed in her stomach. They were willing to trade her life to save their pristine lawns and unbroken windows. It was the exact reason she hated pack politics. Packs protected their own and threw outsiders to the wolves. Leonard's amber eyes flared with gold fire. He dropped his arm and took a slow, deliberate step toward Elder Martha. The sheer predatory dominance rolling off him forced the older woman to take a step back. "I will say this once," Leonard growled. He did not yell, but his voice commanded total obedience. "Hazel is my mate. She stays here. If any member of this council suggests handing her to an enemy again, I will dismantle this council brick by brick. I will strip you of your titles and banish you to the wastelands." Martha gasped, clutching the high collar of her gown. "You would risk the entire pack for one stray?" "I will slaughter Sylvan's entire army before I let them touch her," Leonard promised. He stared down the elders until they all lowered their eyes in submission. Hazel watched the exchange. The cold knot in her stomach dissolved, replaced by a fierce, burning heat. Leonard did not hesitate. He did not weigh the political cost. He claimed her in front of the highest authority in his pack and dared them to challenge him. Martha kept her head bowed. "Sylvan will demand a formal duel, my king. He will challenge you for leadership." "Let him," Leonard stated. Hazel stepped around Leonard's broad shoulders. She did not look at the ground. She looked right at Martha and the cowering elders. She let the leather hunting knife drop from her hand. It hit the wet stone patio with a clatter. She reached out and grabbed Leonard's hand. Leonard looked down in surprise. Hazel slid her fingers between his, intertwining them in a tight, unbreakable grip. His skin felt warm against her cold, muddy fingers. She squeezed his hand, stepping shoulder to shoulder with the Alpha King. "I am not running," Hazel told the council, her voice clear and unwavering. "I am staying right here, and when your king beats Sylvan into the dirt, I am going to help him dig the grave." Martha's eyes widened in shock. The lead royal guard standing near the fountain let out a low, approving chuckle. Leonard tightened his grip on Hazel's hand. A dark, genuine smile broke through his fierce expression. He looked at the elders. "You heard her. Clean up the lawn. Prepare the estate for a formal challenge." He turned his back on the council, pulling Hazel with him. They walked back into the pack house, leaving the stunned elders standing in the mud. Chapter 24. The royal bedroom offered a quiet refuge from the chaos downstairs. Hazel dropped her green canvas bag onto the floor. Bandit poked his head out, let out a tired squeak, and burrowed back into the dark fabric to sleep. Hazel walked into the attached washroom. She turned the brass handles of the sink. Warm water rushed from the faucet. She washed the mud and grit from her hands. The bruised muscle in her bicep throbbed, but the pain felt distant. Leonard walked into the room. He stripped off his heavy leather chest holster and tossed it onto a chair. He unbuttoned his muddy black shirt and let it drop to the rug. He walked over to the sink, standing right behind her. He reached around her, placing his large hands under the running water. He washed the dried blood from his knuckles. Hazel looked at his reflection in the mirror. Broad shoulders, a chest covered in old battle scars, and the faint pink line on his jaw. The emotional walls they built between them over the past week crumbled to dust. The prank war was dead. The silent treatment was a distant memory. Leonard shut the water off. He reached for a white towel and dried his hands. He tossed the towel onto the counter. He placed his hands on Hazel's shoulders. He turned her around to face him. The air in the small room grew thick and heavy. The adrenaline of the battle faded, replaced by the intense magnetic pull of the mate bond. Leonard looked down at her. His amber eyes traced the line of her jaw, the smudge of dirt on her cheek, and the fierce determination in her gaze. "You defended me to the council," Leonard whispered. "They needed a reality check," Hazel replied. Her voice came out breathless. Leonard cupped her face. His thumbs brushed over her cheekbones. You are not a stray anymore, Hazel. You are mine. Claim me then, Hazel challenged. A low growl vibrated deep in his chest. He backed her up against the marble counter. He leaned down, burying his face in the curve of her neck. His lips brushed against her pulse point. The heat of his breath sent a shiver straight down her spine. He opened his mouth and sank his teeth into the soft skin where her neck met her shoulder. Hazel gasped, her hands flying up to grip his broad shoulders. The sharp sting of the bite vanished in a second, replaced by a rushing wave of pure, undeniable power. The bond snapped into place, locking them together on a biological level. The physical claiming sent a surge of heat radiating through her veins. Leonard pulled back, dragging his tongue over the mark to seal it. He rested his forehead against hers, his chest heaving. The air in the room shifted. Hazel's scent of sun-dried linen and sweet orange shifted, intertwining forever with his sharp cedar and black pepper. It was the official mark of a mated pair. It was the scent of a queen. Leonard looked into her eyes. The gold fire in his gaze settled into a deep, steady warmth. He traced the fresh mark on her neck with his thumb. When Sylvan arrives for the duel, Leonard said, his voice a low promise, he will smell this on you. He will know he lost the war before he even steps onto the battlefield. Hazel smiled, a sharp, wicked grin. She reached up and tangled her fingers in his dark hair. Then let's make sure you don't keep him waiting. Chapter 25. Hazel turned away from the marble counter. She crossed the bedroom and grabbed the thick strap of her green canvas bag. She slung it over her shoulder. Bandit remained hidden inside the dark fabric, keeping quiet. Leonard pulled a fresh, dark shirt over his head. He strapped his leather holster back across his chest. He checked the magazine of his handgun, slammed it back into the grip, and secured the weapon. He looked at Hazel. The mate mark on her neck stood out against her pale skin, an undeniable claim. Stay close to me, Leonard ordered. Hazel gave a sharp nod. Her bruised bicep ached under the weight of the canvas bag, but she ignored the pain. They walked out of the suite and descended the grand staircase. The sounds of battle had faded, replaced by an eerie, heavy silence. The foyer was a wreck. Mud tracked across the polished floorboards. A shattered vase lay in pieces near the entrance. The front double doors hung wide open, letting the cold morning wind bite through the hall. Leonard and Hazel stepped through the doorway and out onto the front landing. The sprawling front lawn looked like a churned trench. Boots had ripped the pristine green grass into thick brown mud. Royal guards stood in a wide perimeter holding their weapons. They formed a massive circle around the center of the yard. Rival Alpha Sylvan stood in the middle of the mud. Sylvan looked like a cornered animal. He shifted his weight off his crushed right foot, favoring his left leg. A dark purple bruise covered his forehead. The thick leather brace still wrapped tight around his cracked right wrist. His gray suit was ruined, torn at the shoulder and caked in wet dirt. His 4 foreign guards knelt in the mud near the open iron gates, disarmed and surrounded by Leonard's men. Sylvan had lost the siege. His army had scattered into the pine forest. He stood alone. Elder Martha and the council members watched from the edge of the stone patio. They huddled together, their pristine, formal clothes contrasting with the violence around them. Leonard walked down the front steps. His combat boots hit the wet stones with a heavy thud. Hazel followed right behind him, keeping her eyes locked on the rival Alpha. You lost, Sylvan, Leonard stated. His voice carried across the silent yard, a deep, commanding rumble. Your men ran. Surrender, and I will let you walk back to your territory. Sylvan spat a glob of blood into the mud. He lifted his chin. He refused to look at the kneeling guards at the gate. I do not surrender to a king who weakens his bloodline with a stray, Sylvan snarled. His voice shook with exhausted rage. I invoke the ancient right. I challenge you for the crown, one-on-one, no weapons, to the death, or until submission. A collective gasp rose from the pack elders on the patio. A formal challenge meant the royal guards could not interfere. If Leonard lost, Sylvan would take the territory, the pack house, and the crown. Hazel tightened her grip on the strap of her canvas bag. The cold wind whipped her auburn hair across her face. She looked at Sylvan's battered state. The rival alpha was injured, but desperation made a cornered wolf lethal. Leonard stopped at the edge of the grass. He unbuckled his heavy leather chest holster. He pulled the rig over his head and handed the holstered handgun to the nearest royal guard. "Challenge accepted," Leonard declared. He stepped into the muddy ring. He wore only his black tactical trousers and a dark shirt. The gold fire in his amber eyes burned bright. He rolled his broad shoulders, settling into a fighter's stance. Sylvan limped forward. He kept his braced right arm close to his chest, leading with his good left side. Hazel stood on the edge of the patio, her combat boots touching the mud. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to step in. She wanted to fight. But the ancient laws bound the pack. The royal guards stood like statues, forced to watch their king fight his own battle. Leonard did not wait for the rival alpha to strike first. He lunged forward, closing the distance in a blur of terrifying speed. The duel for the crown began with a brutal clash of bone and muscle. Chapter 26. Leonard crashed into Sylvan. The impact echoed across the quiet lawn. Leonard aimed a punishing strike right at the rival alpha's chest. Sylvan gasped, the air rushing from his lungs. He stumbled backward, his boots sliding in the thick mud. Sylvan tried to counter. He swung his good left fist in a wide, desperate arc. Leonard ducked under the blow. He pivoted on his heel and drove his knee into Sylvan's ribs. The rival alpha groaned. He doubled over, clutching his side. Leonard grabbed the back of Sylvan's ruined gray jacket and hurled him into the dirt. Sylvan hit the ground hard. Mud splashed across his face. He scrambled to get up, using his braced right wrist to push off the earth. He hissed in pain, his cracked bone protesting under his weight. Hazel watched from the edge of the grass. She did not cheer. She kept her jaw locked tight, her eyes tracking every movement. Leonard dominated the fight. He moved with cold, calculating precision. He did not waste energy on flashy moves. He dismantled his opponent piece by piece. Sylvan dragged himself to his feet. He spat more blood. He knew he could not win a fair fight. He was too battered. His foot slowed him down, and his cracked wrist rendered his right arm useless. Sylvan reached into the inside pocket of his ruined jacket with his left hand. He pulled out a silver dagger. The blade gleamed in the dull morning light. To bypass the toxic nature of the metal, the entire hilt was wrapped in thick, reinforced leather. Sylvan gripped the leather handle tight, keeping his bare skin safe from the burning silver. "He has a blade!" Hazel yelled, her voice cutting through the tension. The royal guards shifted, their hands twitching toward their weapons, but they held their ground. Interfering in a formal duel brought a death sentence. Leonard's eyes narrowed. He recognized the metal. He stepped back, putting distance between his bare hands and the toxic silver. Sylvan let out a feral roar. He lunged forward, thrusting the dagger toward Leonard's chest. Leonard sidestepped the attack. His boots slipped in the churned mud. He lost his footing for a fraction of a second. It was all the opening the rival alpha needed. Sylvan slashed the blade backward. The silver edge tore through the fabric of Leonard's black shirt. It bit deep into his left shoulder. The sizzle of burning flesh hissed in the cold air. Leonard let out a rough, pain-filled grunt. He staggered back, clutching his bleeding shoulder. The toxic silver burned through his accelerated healing, sending shockwaves of agony down his arm. Sylvan laughed, a cruel, breathless sound. He raised the silver dagger, preparing to drive it into Leonard's heart and end the duel. Hazel did not wait for the strike. She flipped the flap of her green canvas bag back and plunged her hand inside. Her fingers found the warm, furry body of her pet. She pulled Bandit out of the bag. "Get him!" Hazel ordered. She threw the ferret like a furry fastball straight at the rival alpha. Bandit sailed through the air. He did not hesitate. He landed square on Sylvan's face. The ferret shrieked, a high-pitched sound of pure chaos. Sharp little claws dug into Sylvan's cheeks. Needle-like teeth clamped down hard on the rival alpha's ear. Sylvan screamed. He dropped the silver dagger. It hit the mud with a dull thud. He thrashed his arms, trying to rip the angry animal off his face with his good left hand. Bandit held on, twisting his long body and biting harder. The distraction gave Leonard the opening he needed. Ignoring the burning agony in his left shoulder, Leonard surged forward. He drove his right fist into Sylvan's jaw. The impact sounded like a gunshot. Sylvan's eyes rolled back in his head. He collapsed backward into the mud, unconscious before he even hit the ground. Bandit let go of the man's ear, hopped off his chest, and scurried back across the wet grass toward Hazel. Leonard stood over the fallen rival Alpha. He breathed hard, blood soaking the left side of his dark shirt. He won. Chapter 27. Hazel dropped to her knees in the wet grass. Bandit scrambled into her open arms. She shoved the ferret back into the green canvas bag, folded the heavy canvas flap over, and sprinted toward the center of the lawn. Leonard swayed on his feet, his right hand clamped tight over his wounded left shoulder. Dark blood seeped through his fingers, dripping onto the mud. The silver burn prevented his wolf from healing the deep slash. Hazel reached him. She grabbed his right arm and slung it over her shoulders to support his weight. "Lean on me." Leonard gritted his teeth. "I can walk." "Shut up and lean," Hazel commanded. She braced her boots in the mud and took his weight. The royal guards broke their perimeter. 2 men grabbed the unconscious Sylvan from the dirt, dragging him toward the holding cells. The lead guard ran ahead of Hazel, pushing the heavy glass doors open. They hauled Leonard inside the pack house. Hazel ignored Elder Martha, who stood frozen on the patio. She marched Leonard down the long, dark corridor toward the medical wing. The medical room was a stark contrast to the rest of the ancient pack house. Bright, fluorescent lights glared overhead. White square tiles covered the floor and walls. Stainless steel counters held rows of sterile equipment. 3 pack healers stood near a metal examination table. They wore pristine white coats. They stared in shock as Hazel dragged their bleeding king into the spotless room, tracking mud across the white tiles. "Get him on the table," the head healer ordered, rushing forward. Hazel helped Leonard sit on the edge of the metal table. He kept his jaw locked, refusing to make a sound of pain. Hazel stepped back, her flannel shirt stained with his blood. The head healer stepped between Hazel and the king. The older wolf held a pair of medical shears. He looked at Hazel's ripped jeans and mud-caked combat boots. "Step aside, Stray," the healer barked. "You are contaminating a sterile environment. Leave the room." Hazel's hazel eyes flashed with a fierce, burning fire. The exhaustion and the fear melted into pure authority. "Do not call me a Stray," Hazel warned. Her voice cracked through the bright room, low and dangerous. She pointed a finger at the man's chest. "I am your queen, and you will not tell me to leave." The healer froze. He looked at the fresh mate mark resting on the curve of Hazel's neck. He looked at her fierce expression. He swallowed hard and took a step back, lowering his shears in submission. Hazel turned her attention to the other 2 healers standing by the stainless steel counter. She pointed at the cabinets. "Bring sterile water," Hazel ordered, her voice sharp and steady. "Bring thick gauze and heavy bandages. The blade was pure silver. It burns. We need to flush the wound right now." The 2 healers jolted into action. They scrambled to open cabinets, pulling out supplies. They moved with frantic speed, obeying her commands without a single word of protest. Leonard sat on the edge of the metal table. The pain from the silver tore through his shoulder, but a proud, dark smile touched the corners of his mouth. He watched Hazel command the room. She did not cower. She did not back down. Hazel grabbed a pair of shears from the metal tray. She stepped up to Leonard. She cut the ruined, blood-soaked fabric of his black shirt away from his shoulder. She tossed the ruined cotton onto the floor. The deep slash looked raw and angry. The edges of the wound hissed, reacting to the toxic metal residue left behind by the dagger. Hazel took the sterile water from the approaching healer. She did not hesitate. "This is going to hurt." Leonard met her gaze. "Do it." Hazel poured the water over the open wound, washing the silver poison from his blood. Leonard gripped the edge of the metal table until his knuckles turned white, but he kept his eyes locked on his queen. Chapter 28. 3 days passed. The pack house returned to order. The shattered glass in the grand hall was swept away. New tables replaced the broken furniture. The royal guards maintained a strict, vigilant patrol along the borders, but Sylvan's remaining men stayed far away in their own territory. The grand hall swelled with the entire pack. Every wolf stood in attendance. The afternoon sun poured through the tall, arched windows, casting bright beams across the polished floorboards. Hazel stood at the front of the room, standing on the raised wooden platform. She did not wear a red silk dress. She wore a tailored forest green velvet suit. The rich fabric stretched across her shoulders and tapered at her waist. The jacket sleeves were rolled up past her elbows, a stubborn reminder of her stray roots. The dark purple bruise on her bicep was fading to a dull yellow. She wore her scuffed black combat boots. A heavy, solid gold crown rested on her auburn hair. The metal felt cold against her scalp. Leonard stood beside her. He wore his formal dark suit. The fabric stretched tight over the thick white bandages wrapping his left shoulder. The faint pink line on his jaw was faded, leaving clean skin behind. He looked out at the crowded hall, his amber eyes radiating alpha authority. Elder Martha and the rest of the council stood in the front row. They did not sneer. They did not whisper behind their hands. They bowed their heads in deep, genuine submission. Hazel had fought for the king. She had saved his life with a ferret and a muddy combat boot. The pack respected strength, and she had proven she possessed it. "The challenge is settled," Elder Martha announced, her voice echoing in the large room. She kept her eyes directed at the floorboards. "King Leonard retains the throne, and the pack recognizes Hazel Brooks as the official Queen of the West." A loud, booming cheer erupted from the royal guards standing along the walls. The lead guard slammed the wooden end of his silver-tipped staff against the stone floor in a rhythmic salute. The rest of the pack joined in, the applause thunderous and undeniable. Hazel looked out at the crowd. The noise washed over her. She hated pack politics. She hated the rules. But standing beside Leonard, the heavy crown did not feel like a cage. It felt like a warning to anyone who tried to cross her. The ceremony concluded. The elders turned and mingled with the crowd. The tense formality drained from the room. Hazel let out a long breath. She slumped her shoulders, the stiff posture making her back ache. She looked down at the floor. Leonard stood next to her. His heavy leather boots looked polished and perfect. The dark laces tied in neat, orderly bows. A familiar, rebellious spark lit up Hazel's eyes. The formal setting felt too serious. The coronation felt too stuffy. She needed to break the perfection. She reached into the pocket of her forest green velvet trousers. She pulled out a splintered wooden pencil. She dropped it. The pencil hit the wooden platform with a soft clatter. "Oops," Hazel muttered. She dropped to her hands and knees, the velvet fabric bunching around her legs. She crawled closer to Leonard's boots. She grabbed the left lace. She grabbed the right lace. Her fingers moved fast, pulling the thick leather strings across the gap. She tied a complex, impossible knot, binding his heavy boots together. She patted the dark leather and picked up her pencil. She stayed on her knees, waiting for the reprimand. She waited for the exasperated sigh. Leonard did not sigh. He looked down at her. The gold flecks in his amber eyes danced with dark amusement. He did not step back. He did not test the knot. He reached down. His large hands clamped onto her waist. His grip was firm and unbroken. Ignoring the sharp, burning pull of his stitches, he lifted her off the wooden platform, hauling her into the air. Her combat boots dangled above the floorboards. Hazel grabbed his wrists, a laugh escaping her throat. "Put me down! You are going to rip your stitches!" Leonard held her suspended in front of him. He leaned in close, his mouth hovering a breath away from hers. The heavy gold crown gleamed in the sunlight. "I don't need to walk," Leonard whispered. He pulled her flush against his chest and brought his mouth down on hers, sealing the promise in front of the entire pack. The end. Quick favor, don't go anywhere yet. If you thought Hazel was brave for tying the Alpha King's boots together right under the royal dinner table, wait until you meet the heroine in this next story on your screen. You have to hear this disaster unfold. Click the video on your screen right now. It is pure, unhinged chaos.